Sometimes the smallest promise is the one that echoes the longest. The morning air sat still over the narrow street, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder than it should be, like the soft scrape of rubber against pavement or the distant hum of an engine turning the corner too slowly to be passing through. And Marcus Reed noticed it without looking up at first, because he was kneeling by the front steps, fingers steady as he tied his son's worn sneakers, the laces slightly frayed at the ends, the kind you keep using because they still hold together if you're careful, and his hands carried the faint scent of motor oil that never quite washed out no matter how long he stood at the sink the night before. The boy shifted his weight, backpack sliding down one shoulder, and Marcus adjusted it with a quiet efficiency, pulling the strap snug like he'd done 100 times before, like routine was the only thing keeping the world from slipping sideways. And then the sound came again, clearer now. Low engines, more than one, not rushing, not aggressive, just deliberate. And that's when Marcus finally looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly against the pale sunlight as 5 black SUVs rolled into view one after another, clean, polished, out of place on a street where most cars had stories written in dust and small dents. They slowed as they approached his house, tires pressing gently against the cracked asphalt, and one by one they came to a stop right in front, engines idling in a quiet, controlled rhythm that didn't belong to his world. Not here, not in front of a place where the paint on the door had begun to fade unevenly and the porch light flickered if you didn't tap it just right. Across the street, a curtain shifted, then another, neighbors pretending not to stare but not looking away either, and the boy followed Marcus's gaze, squinting a little, confusion settling in before curiosity had a chance to catch up. "Dad, what's happening?" he asked softly, his voice small in the space between those idling engines. And Marcus didn't answer right away because he didn't know, and he wasn't the kind of man who filled silence just to make it go away. Instead, he rose slowly, one hand resting briefly on his son's shoulder, steady, grounding, his posture calm but alert, like he was reading something invisible in the air. And for a moment nothing else moved. Not the cars, not the people watching from behind windows, not even the wind. And then the first SUV door opened with a quiet, precise click that seemed louder than it should have been, and Marcus felt something shift. Not fear, not quite concern, just the faint recognition that whatever was about to step out of those vehicles didn't come here by accident, that it carried intention, history, maybe even a memory he hadn't thought about in years. And he glanced down at his hands, at the faint lines of grease that had settled into the creases of his skin, and then back up again, his expression unchanged, steady as ever, because whatever this was, whoever this was, he would meet it the same way he met everything else in his life, without raising his voice, without stepping back, and without ever forgetting who he was. The engines kept running, low and steady, like they were waiting for permission to breathe. And Marcus stood there with his hand still resting lightly on his son's shoulder, not gripping, not pulling him back, just enough to say stay close without needing the words. And his eyes moved once across the line of vehicles, counting without thinking, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, clean windows, dark tint, the kind that did not show who was inside unless they wanted to be seen, and that detail mattered to him more than the cars themselves because people who arrive like this usually know exactly what they are doing. The front door of the first SUV opened fully now, slow, controlled, and a man stepped out in a pressed suit that had never seen a day of manual work, his shoes catching the light in a way Marcus noticed immediately, not because he cared about the shine, but because he knew what it took to keep anything that clean, time, money, distance from places like this, and the man glanced once at a tablet in his hand before looking up at the house as if confirming something already decided. While behind him another door opened, then another, each movement measured, coordinated without words, and the street felt smaller with every second they stood there. Marcus shifted his weight just slightly, enough to place himself half a step in front of his son, not blocking him, not hiding him, just positioning, the way a man does when he has learned to expect the unexpected without letting it change how he stands. And his son leaned a little closer, eyes wide now, tracking every motion, trying to understand why strangers in expensive cars would stop in front of a house where the mailbox leaned a few degrees to the left and the paint along the window frame had begun to peel. Across the street, a screen door creaked open and then shut again quickly, Someone deciding it was better to watch from inside. And Marcus exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that resets the body without drawing attention. His gaze steady, not challenging, not welcoming, just present. And then the man in the suit took a few steps forward, stopping at the edge of the walkway as if there was an invisible line he understood he should not cross without invitation. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the space between them filled only by the quiet rhythm of engines and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Marcus noticed the small things, the way the man held himself, the way his eyes moved not with curiosity but with purpose, like he had been sent rather than having chosen to come, and that told him this was not a mistake, not a wrong address, not a casual stop. This was something that had been planned, something that had taken time, and time meant history, even if he could not yet see it clearly. And the man finally spoke, his voice polite, careful, carrying the tone of someone used to being listened to, asking, "Is this the residence of Marcus Reed?" And Marcus did not answer immediately, not because he was unsure, but because he always gave a question its proper weight before responding, and his fingers tapped once, lightly, against his son's shoulder, a quiet signal of reassurance, before he said, calm and even. Depends on who is asking, not defensive, not aggressive, just honest. And the man paused for half a second, as if adjusting to that answer, before lowering the tablet slightly, and somewhere behind those dark windows, another presence shifted, unseen but unmistakably there, waiting, and Marcus felt it then, faint but certain, like a memory brushing against the edge of his mind, something from years ago that had never asked to be remembered, but had never fully left either. The man in the suit gave a small nod, not offended, not surprised, as if he had expected that answer and respected it, and he adjusted his grip on the tablet before speaking again, slower this time, choosing each word with care. "My name is Daniel Brooks, sir, and I was asked to find you." And Marcus watched him without interruption, his expression steady, eyes focused not just on the words but on the space between them, the intention behind them, because people often revealed more in what they did not say. And behind Daniel, the second SUV door opened with a softer motion, almost hesitant compared to the others, and this time no one stepped out immediately, just a pause, a quiet shift in the air that felt different from before, less controlled, more human, and Marcus felt that same faint pull again, stronger now, like a memory trying to take shape, but not fully there yet. His son glanced up at him, searching his face for a signal, something to explain what was happening, but Marcus only gave him a slight squeeze on the shoulder, grounding, steady, the kind of reassurance that did not need words. And then Marcus spoke again, calm and even. "Find me for what?" Not confrontational, just direct, and Daniel hesitated for the first time, just a fraction of a second, before answering. "Someone would like to speak with you." And he stepped slightly to the side, not fully moving out of the way, but enough to shift the focus, enough to make it clear that he was not the reason they were here. The street seemed to hold its breath again, even the distant sounds fading into the background. And then the second SUV door opened wider, slowly, and a woman stepped out, her movements careful, almost deliberate in their simplicity, no rush, no performance, just presence. And Marcus noticed immediately that she was not dressed to impress the street or the neighbors or anyone watching from behind curtains. Her clothes were clean, well-fitted, but understated, like someone who had nothing to prove and no interest in explaining herself. And she stood there for a moment beside the open door, taking in the house, the walkway, the small details that most people would overlook, and then her eyes found Marcus. There was something in that look, something that did not match the rest of the scene, not curiosity, not judgment, but recognition, quiet and certain, and Marcus felt it land before he understood it, like hearing a familiar song from another room. And he did not move, did not step forward, did not step back. He simply stood there, meeting her gaze with the same calm he carried into everything. And the woman took a step toward him, then another, stopping just short of the walkway where Daniel had paused earlier, as if she understood the same invisible line. And for a moment she said nothing, her eyes searching his face, not for confirmation, but for something deeper, something only she could define. And when she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he expected, steady but carrying a weight that had been built over years. "You probably do not remember me," she said. And Marcus did not answer right away because he was already searching, already turning over fragments in his mind, the shape of a face, the sound of a voice, a moment from long ago that had never asked to be important and yet had stayed, quietly, somewhere beneath everything else, waiting for a day like this. Marcus did not look away from her, but something in his expression shifted, not visibly to anyone else on the street, not even to his son standing close beside him, but inside. Something moved, slow and deliberate, like a door opening just enough to let light reach a place that had been quiet for a long time. And he studied her face again, this time not as a stranger stepping out of a polished vehicle, but as someone carrying a memory he had not yet fully placed. Her posture remained composed. Shoulders relaxed but not careless, her hands resting naturally at her sides, not reaching, not demanding. And there was a stillness about her that did not come from confidence alone, but from years of learning how to hold herself together when things around her did not. And Marcus noticed that, because he recognized that kind of stillness, it was not something people were born with, it was something they earned. His son shifted slightly again, curiosity growing, but still quiet, watching the exchange with wide eyes, sensing that this moment mattered even if he did not yet understand why. And Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm, measured. "Maybe I do," he said, not as a claim, but as an opening. And the woman exhaled softly, almost like she had been holding that breath longer than she realized. And she took one more step forward, stopping at the edge of the walkway where the concrete met the worn grass, respecting the boundary without being told. 11 years ago, she began, her voice steady but carrying a trace of something deeper beneath it, something that had not faded with time. My car broke down on the side of a road just outside of town. And Marcus felt it then, clearer now, the shape of the memory forming, not all at once, but in pieces, the heat of that afternoon, the sound of a struggling engine, the sight of someone standing beside a car that did not belong to the place it had stopped. And he said nothing, letting her continue, because this was no longer about whether he remembered. It was about what that moment had meant to her. "I did not know what to do," she said, her eyes steady on his. "I had somewhere important to be, and I thought everything was falling apart over something so small." And she paused, just for a second, not to gather herself, but to give the moment the space it deserved. And then she added, quieter, "And then you pulled over." And Marcus's gaze softened just slightly, not with emotion that demanded attention, but with recognition settling into place, and he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, because now he saw it. Not just the situation, but the person she had been back then, younger, uncertain, carrying pressure she did not yet know how to manage. "You fixed it," she continued, quickly, like it was nothing. And there was the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of her lips, not bright, not exaggerated, just real. "And when I asked how much I owed you, you did not even think about it." And Marcus's son glanced up at him again, hearing something new in her tone, something that made the story feel important. And Marcus remained still, letting the memory complete itself. And she finished the sentence with the same quiet clarity that had carried her through every step since that day. "You said I could pay you when I was rich." And the words hung there, simple, unembellished, but heavier now than they had ever been in the moment they were spoken. And Marcus let out a slow breath, not surprised, not overwhelmed, just acknowledging the truth of it. And he gave a small nod, as if to say yes, that sounds like something I would say, because to him, it had never been anything more than that, just a sentence, just a moment. But standing here now, watching her, he understood that for her, it had become something else. Entirely. She did not smile after saying it, not fully, because the memory was not something light to her. It was something that had stayed, something that had followed her into rooms where decisions were made and expectations were high. And Marcus could see that now in the way she held his gaze, steady but not demanding, like she was not here to prove anything, only to complete something that had been left open. His son looked between them, trying to connect the story to the man he knew, to the father, who fixed things in their small garage and reminded him to finish his homework before dinner. And Marcus finally shifted his stance slightly, easing the weight off one foot, his hand dropping gently from his son's shoulder, but staying close enough to reach again without thinking. And he spoke in the same calm tone he had used from the beginning. "You made it where you were going that day. Not a question, but not entirely a statement either. Just a simple thread offered back to her, and she nodded once. A small motion that carried more meaning than a longer answer would have. I did, she said, and there was a quiet certainty in her voice, not just about that day, but about everything that had followed it. And she glanced briefly at the house again, at the worn steps, the slightly crooked mailbox, the small details that spoke of years lived carefully, not carelessly, and then back at Marcus. And I kept going, she added, her tone softer now, not for effect, but because the truth of it did not need to be loud, and Marcus understood that kind of statement, because he had lived it too, just in a different direction, without the polished vehicles, without the suits, but with the same steady movement forward, behind her. The man named Daniel remained still, no longer the focus, just part of the background now, and the other drivers waited by their vehicles, quiet, patient, as if they knew this was not a moment to interrupt, and the street had settled into a strange kind of calm again. The initial curiosity of the neighbors fading into a quieter attention, like everyone sensed that something real was happening, even if they did not know what. The woman took a slow breath, not to steady herself, but to choose her next words carefully, and when she spoke again, it was not rushed, not rehearsed, just honest. There were a lot of times I wanted to quit, she said, her eyes not leaving his. Times when things did not go the way they were supposed to, when people expected things from me that I was not sure I could give. And she paused briefly, not looking away, not hiding from the weight of what she was saying. And every time, I remembered that day, and Marcus's expression remained composed, but there was a quiet shift in his eyes, something deeper, not pride, not surprise, just recognition of the impact that a moment, a simple act, could carry far beyond its original place. Not because you fixed the car, she continued, her voice steady, but because you did it like it did not matter who I was, or what I had, or what I could give you in return. And her words settled into the space between them, clear, unembellished. And Marcus let out a slow breath, his gaze dropping for just a second before returning to her, because he was not used to hearing his actions described like that, not because he disagreed, but because to him, it had never been something that needed to be defined. His son shifted again, closer now, his small hand brushing lightly against Marcus's side, grounding him in the present, and Marcus rested his hand briefly on the boy's head, a quiet gesture, automatic, and then looked back at her, his voice as steady as before. I just fixed what was in front of me, he said. Simple, direct, and she gave a small nod, as if she had expected that answer, as if it was exactly why she had come all this way, not to change him, not to repay him in a way that would make him uncomfortable, but to stand here, in front of the same man who had not changed at all, and show him what that moment had become on the other side of 11 years. Marcus stepped back slightly, giving her the space she had not asked for but seemed to need, and the air between them held a quiet weight, like the pause between two notes that makes the melody more powerful, and he watched her take in the house, the small details, the chipped paint on the railing, the grass pressed flat where the boy had run countless times, the faint stain on the porch from an old coffee spill that had never fully cleaned, and her eyes lingered on these things with a strange tenderness, not judgment, and Marcus could feel it, the kind of attention that did not demand, did not evaluate, just acknowledged, and he allowed himself to notice it, the faint warmth in his chest, not pride, not excitement, just the simple recognition that someone truly saw him, not the facade, not the work, not the routine, but the man who had spent years quietly holding a life together. And she shifted her weight slightly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear, glancing down at the boy, who had moved a step closer to his father, small hands in his pockets, wide eyes watching every movement, sensing the significance even if he could not name it. And Marcus gave a subtle nod toward him, a silent signal of reassurance, that everything was okay, and the woman turned her attention back to Marcus, speaking softly, measured. I have carried that day with me through so many decisions, so many late nights, so many times I had to choose between what was easy and what was right. And the words seemed to settle over the walkway, calm but deliberate, like a gentle wind moving over still water, and Marcus felt the quiet echo of them, the ripple of meaning stretching across years, and he kept his posture even, letting her speak, letting the moment unfold without interruption, not because he was indifferent, but because he understood that the weight of what she carried was hers to lay down as she chose. And he did not need to push, to guide, to instruct, simply to be present. And she looked at him then with a hint of a smile that did not need brightness, just sincerity, and she continued, "Every time I doubted myself, every time I thought I was not enough, I remembered the calm of that day, the quiet of your hands at work, the way you looked at me like I mattered even when it would have been easier to turn away." And Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in, the truth of them settling over him like a soft weight, familiar and unintrusive, and he glanced at his son, who now stood between them, small and steady, feeling the importance of the moment. And Marcus bent down slightly to adjust the boy's jacket, the familiar motion grounding both of them in the present. And when he looked up again, the woman's gaze held an understanding that needed no reply, the kind that carried years of memory. And she took another small step forward, closing just enough distance to make the exchange intimate without intrusion. And she spoke one final time in that quiet, deliberate way. "I came here not to repay, not to impress, but to acknowledge that what you did mattered, that it shaped more than one life, and I wanted you to know." And Marcus felt the gravity of it, not as obligation, not as expectation, just as truth, a simple recognition offered freely, and he nodded, slow, deliberate, a single movement of agreement and comprehension, letting her words complete their journey without adding anything more, because sometimes the most powerful statement is not spoken, just received. The woman took a careful step closer, her presence steady but unhurried, and Marcus observed her, noting how she seemed to carry the weight of her own life with quiet control, the way her shoulders relaxed slightly but did not slump, the subtle way she balanced attention between him and his son without letting her gaze linger too long in one place. And the boy shifted, curious, glancing at the SUV line again, then back at her, sensing the significance of the arrival without fully understanding why. And Marcus felt the moment stretch, the air holding a stillness that allowed all of them to exist in the same space without urgency, without expectation, just presence. She spoke next, her voice calm, measured. "I wanted to show up here in the way that mattered, not with ceremony, not with fanfare, but just as someone acknowledging a moment that shaped more than one life." And Marcus let the words land, not interrupting, not commenting, simply absorbing them as one might absorb a light drizzle, soft and quiet, persistent in its effect over time. And he noted the deliberate care in her tone, how she did not rush to fill silence, how she did not seek to impress or overwhelm, just to communicate. And it struck him that this was the same clarity he had offered without thinking all those years ago. Hands steady on a car engine, voice low, eyes focused, and he recognized it now in her, in the way she had carried it forward into her own life, shaping decisions, guiding actions, quietly and without expectation. His son shuffled slightly closer, the sound of sneakers on concrete muted but noticeable, and Marcus adjusted his posture subtly, a protective rhythm ingrained over years, allowing his son to feel safe while letting the woman exist in their space unchallenged. And she acknowledged the boy with a small nod, no words needed, just recognition, the human connection established through presence alone. And then she glanced back at Marcus, eyes soft but direct. "I have wanted to do this for years, but I needed to find the right way to come, the way that would not intrude, that would respect everything that was already here." And Marcus felt a small tightening in his chest, not emotion that demanded expression, just awareness of the care it took to act thoughtfully, to show respect for a life that had continued without fanfare. And he nodded once, imperceptibly but meaningfully, acknowledging her choice, her journey, and the patience it took to bring this moment into being. The wind moved faintly through the trees lining the street, carrying the scent of early spring, fresh grass and soil, a quiet accompaniment to the soft hum of the idling SUVs. And Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the space expand slightly, as if the pause itself carried weight and meaning. And then she spoke. Again, softer now, almost a whisper. "I wanted to let you know that the kindness you gave, without expecting anything, has been a guide in my life, more than you might imagine." And Marcus kept his expression even, letting the words resonate without needing to respond with more than presence. And the boy leaned slightly against his father, sensing the significance, the silent acknowledgement of what had been done and what had been carried forward, and Marcus felt the depth of the moment settle over him. Quiet, deliberate, and true, the kind of acknowledgement that does not need applause, only recognition. And they all stood there for a few more breaths, letting the weight of years and actions and memory balance between them, unspoken but understood, carrying forward the human connection that had begun with nothing more than steady hands, calm eyes, and a quiet promise kept across time. Marcus exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, and the air between them held a stillness that felt almost sacred, the quiet hum of the engines in the background fading into the gentle rustle of leaves above, the way the sun caught on the faded edges of the porch, highlighting the imperfections that told the story of years lived simply and honestly, and he noticed how she studied those details, small movements of attention that revealed care without judgment, and he realized that this was not about repayment or recognition. It was about acknowledgement, pure and unadorned, the kind that does not require words to carry weight. His son shifted slightly, the faint scrape of his sneakers on the concrete drawing a breath of attention from the woman, who bent her head just a little, nodding subtly, the motion quiet, respectful, connecting across the space without speaking. And Marcus felt a swell of appreciation for the human instinct to honor presence without interference, the way she balanced her own intention with respect for the life already in motion before her. And he allowed himself to absorb it, feeling the years and choices settle in the space between them. She spoke then, low, deliberate. I came not to change your life, nor to rewrite the past, but to show that one moment, one simple act, can ripple through time in ways we cannot always see. And Marcus's gaze softened ever so slightly, the words resonating in him like a faint echo that had waited for years to find its place, and he nodded once, just enough to acknowledge, not to respond, because in this quiet exchange, acknowledgement was the language spoken, and it was enough. She glanced toward the boy again, offering the smallest smile, not theatrical, not demanding, just a flicker of warmth that communicated understanding, and the boy returned it. In his own tentative way, sensing the weight of this moment without knowing why it carried so much meaning, and Marcus rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, grounding him in the present while letting the connection unfold naturally. She returned her attention to Marcus, taking a step back yet maintaining a deliberate closeness that kept the exchange intimate but not intrusive, and her voice carried the same measured cadence. I wanted to come in the way that mattered, quietly, without interruption, so that this moment could exist on its own terms, shaped only by what was already true between us. And Marcus felt the simple integrity of her approach, the alignment of intention and action, the quiet humanity that mirrored his own, and he recognized that this was the culmination of a long chain of small choices, all tracing back to a single act performed without expectation, without calculation. Just steady hands, calm eyes, and a willingness to help. The sun shifted, casting longer shadows across the porch, the warmth of the morning touching the worn wood and the faded brick, and the wind stirred, carrying the scent of spring, grass and soil, and the faintest hint of blossoms from a nearby yard. And Marcus inhaled, letting the sensory details anchor him to the present while keeping the memory of that day alive, intact, unembellished, yet powerful. And she spoke once more, softer still. I did not come for praise. I did not come for acknowledgement. I came to let you know that your choice to act with kindness has shaped more than one life, and that it has not been forgotten. And Marcus felt the weight of it settle comfortably across his shoulders, grounding him in the quiet reality that small, deliberate acts, unnoticed in the moment, carry a resonance far beyond the span of a day or a year. And he nodded, slow, deliberate, letting the gesture convey what words could not, because in this space, in this moment, acknowledgement, presence, and quiet respect were enough to close the circle of memory and intention. Marcus finally turned slowly, signaling to his son with a subtle gesture to stay close, and together they moved toward the house, each step deliberate, grounding them in the present, while the woman remained just at the edge of the walkway, letting them lead the way, her posture relaxed but attentive, absorbing every detail of the small home that had been a part of her memory for so long. And she noticed the faded spots on the porch, the slight warp of the wood from years of weather, the marks left by hands and feet that had shaped the daily rhythm of life here. And it struck her that all of it was still alive, still telling the story of the man who had stood quietly in her memory all these years. And Marcus led them to the front door, key turning in the lock, the familiar click of metal meeting metal, resonating in the calm morning air. And once inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning products, warm and lived in, and she looked around with soft attention, noting the small, unpolished details that marked the life of someone who had cared less about appearances and more about what mattered. And the boy followed his father through the hallway, curiosity tempered by the quiet gravity of the moment, his small fingers brushing the walls lightly as if marking them for himself. And Marcus finally stopped in the living room, gesturing subtly for her to enter, and she did, each step careful, respectful, feeling the space without imposing herself. And the room held the history of years lived deliberately, from the worn rug to the framed photographs on the wall, each image a marker of family, growth, and quiet victories. And she allowed herself to take it in, not for judgment, not for envy, but simply as acknowledgement, the weight of all those moments landing gently in her. Awareness. Marcus moved to the window, pulling aside a thin curtain to let the light fall fully into the room, and she followed the motion with her eyes, seeing the sunlight catch on familiar objects, the edges of furniture, the dust motes floating gently in the beams. And he turned to her, expression calm, steady, voice low and certain. "This is where we live. This is how we keep it together." And she nodded, understanding fully the quiet pride embedded in his tone, the unspoken strength of a man who had never sought recognition but had carried life forward with dignity. And she took a slow breath, letting the emotion settle without needing to express it, because the space and the presence of the people before her said more than any words could. The boy climbed onto the couch, curling up slightly with a small sigh, and Marcus watched him, a subtle smile touching his lips, before returning his gaze to her, eyes softening just a fraction, acknowledging what had been said and what had been understood. And she spoke finally, voice low, deliberate, almost a whisper. "Thank you for that day, for your hands, your patience, your quiet strength, and for letting it all go without asking for more." And Marcus exhaled, slow and even, letting the words settle, and he nodded once, simple and complete, a gesture that spoke volumes, closing the circle of acknowledgement without need for embellishment, because sometimes the most profound connection is created not with words, but with presence, respect, and the quiet understanding that kindness given freely continues to resonate far beyond the moment it is offered.